Hello, my name is Michael Lambert, and today I want to talk a little bit about Keir Starmer's speech at the Labour Party conference last week. The week before, in my last video, I talked about Sunak's speech to the Tory party conference, a speech which I thought was pretty second-rate and full of dishonesty, and it was very much the speech of a party that was a bit desperate, with a fairly desperate leader. Sunak's speech, on the other hand, was in many ways very successful, because I think the Labour Party are obviously feeling now that it's only a matter of time before they become the government. And Starmer said all the right things in order to sort of buoy up the troops. And there was an awful lot of up and down, standing ovations. My word, I mean, they must have been all exhausted when they went home, because there were so many standing ovations, and they were also excited and also pleased and so on. But if you look at the speech, it's pretty thin gruel. It's pretty delusional, drivel and so on. It's honest, unlike Sunak's speech, but it does bear looking at in some detail. Now, I just want to start, before I say anything else, I want to say this, that I have, over the years, I voted for all three parties, but from the point of view of these videos, I try to be as honest as I can. I try to be as fair as I can, and I am not, unlike many other commentators, many other YouTubers, I'm not backing a particular party. I'm not backing Labour, I'm not backing Conservatives, I'm not backing Liberals or anybody else. I just want to look at it all evenly. In the past, when I've criticised Sunak or the Tories, I've always got a very good response. And last week, for example, I got an extremely good response and lots of new subscribers. But what I've found in the past also is that if I criticise Starmer, people get very cross, very upset, and they seem to think it's sort of personal. They seem to think if I did criticise Starmer for anything, it means that I'm anti-Labour or that I'm pro-Conservative. I'm not. I'm just pointing out that he's not perfect, and I think, in my view, he's far from perfect. I frankly am rather disappointed with him. I wish him the best. I hope we get a Labour government. I hope it's a success, and I hope he's a successful Prime Minister. But I've got my doubts, my reservations. And so please bear in mind, whatever I have to say, it's not knocking him. I think he's a thoroughly decent, nice man. He's honest, he's integrity, he's obviously very bright and so on. And I think probably in private he's probably very good fun, quite an entertaining sort of guy. He's a nice guy. Unlike, say, the leader of the Conservative Party. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be a great Prime Minister, or that he's going to be able to do all these things he can do. It doesn't also mean that he isn't rather wishy-washy, rather non-committal wherever he can be. And I think that showed up in this speech last week, because it was a speech of about an hour. Loads and loads of it, and it was a sort of speech you might imagine somebody said to Alexa, write a speech, an hour's waffling, and whatever you do, don't say anything at all that will upset anybody apart from the Tories. Just avoid anything that's controversial. And I think there is a limit to how long you can go on avoiding addressing issues that really matter. Let me just give you a few examples of things that he didn't mention last week, didn't talk about, before I talk about what he actually did talk about. By far the biggest issue, as I've mentioned before, facing us all is global warming. I mean, it is just more important. It may be boring, may be dull, and it may, as far as we are living in this country, it means we get some lovely sunny weather. I mean, beautiful weather last week in October. But, all over the world we're seeing all these forest fires, and we're seeing the floods, we're seeing the melting ice caps, the melting glaciers, the rising sea levels. It's an absolute disaster. And when you think Homo sapiens been around 300,000 years, and yet in the last 5 years you can actually see the climate changing. Well, we've got to do something about it. You've got to do something to stop this. We're going to try to. I mean, this should be an absolute priority, because if things go on as the way they're going now, 10 years' time, there ain't going to be any. I mean, you're going to have millions and millions, maybe billions of people migrating from Africa and so on. I mean, it really is a huge problem. Now, in this entire 1 hour speech, Starmer mentioned climate change as follows. One sentence. Climate change is a recipe for instability. We've seen that on our TVs this summer. Let's move on. I mean, it's more important than that. I mean, I think really we and governments all over the world should have whole departments, government departments just concentrating on nothing but global warming. The other big thing facing us all, and again, it's something else that a lot of people say, oh, never mind, it's not really going to happen in 30 years and all the rest of it, is AI. I mean, this is a threat that's coming at us so quickly. Do you know, I was thinking the other day, I got my first smartphone in 2008, I think, when they first came out. I got an iPhone, and at the time it was just sensational. I just thought, possibly have the internet on your phone. It was just amazing. Now, just 15 years later, everybody's got one. You go on the tube and you find there are 50 people in the carriage and 45 of them on their phones. And you can have FaceTime with somebody in Australia and it's absolutely crystal clear and the voice is absolutely clear. You do all your banking, you do your purchasing, you do everything on your phone. It's such a big part of our lives now that if we didn't have these phones, I mean, society probably wouldn't function. There'd be absolute chaos. If you switch off every phone tomorrow, there'd be absolute chaos. We've come to depend upon them totally. And likewise with AI, it's all going on, you know. You don't hear about it every day. It's not always in the papers. But there's such a race to develop it, particularly amongst the Chinese and the Americans, trying to develop AI, because the prizes for those who succeed, who are in the front, are going to be immense. And so all this is going on, and more things are going to be taken over by AI. And in the way that phones have, in 15 years, have transformed our lives, likewise AI is going to. And this is something we should all be concerned about. Millions and millions of jobs are going to be lost. So much is going to be done by that is being done by human beings now. If you look at China, where they've got AI, whereby every single citizen, in many parts, their entire lives are on a database run by AI. Your job, where your children go to school, where you live, just about everything of your lives is on these databases, and that will happen here. There's no way we're going to stop it. There's a very good documentary I'd recommend on BBC, Storyville, called AI. It talks about just how powerful it's going to be and how dangerous it's going to be. But again, in this speech, talking about he's going to be taking over the government and so on, his sole reference to AI is, he says, talking about the NHS, he says we'll be able to deploy the power of artificial intelligence to spot disease quickly. It's more important than that. Much more important about that. He didn't mention Europe. He didn't mention the EU. Not a word. The EU that we wrenched ourselves out of 3 or 4 years ago, and which has caused us so much damage, has absolutely wrecked our economy, has made it so difficult for, or made virtually impossible for small and medium-sized businesses to export to the EU, that has deprived us of all the hundreds of thousands of workers that used to come here, and doctors and nurses and all the rest of it. It's caused so many problems. It's at the root of most of our economic problems right now. Now I mention because, of course, he's all for Brexit. He did mention Brexit once, fun enough, actually, in the speech, and he was talking about Tories lying to us. He said, when they lied, he said, they lied when they told you to your face that Brexit would only bring benefits to your business. They were lying then because, as we've all found out now, it didn't bring any benefits whatsoever. We don't want to back on it, so we better not mention it because it might upset people who read the Daily Express in Doncaster. And those people you've got to be careful about it. Just avoiding everything slightly controversial. PR, he did mention PR. The Labour had a conference last November. They all voted overwhelmingly for change to PR. But no, he wants to stick with first past the post, a system which has always benefited the Tories, almost always, and which is only used in the whole of Europe, and the 40 or 50 countries in Europe, by Belarus and us. He didn't mention tax evasion, not a word. All this tax evasion, all these people coming here laundering their money, people evading tax right, left and centre, all these PPE contracts. No, I didn't do anything about that. I didn't mention that. Didn't mention test and trace, what happened to all that money, all the bounce back loans. Didn't mention, no. Didn't mention anything about the public order bill and Braverman's other draconian legislation whereby we're now a police state, the police can stop anybody, arrest anybody without having any reason to do so. They can ask you to turn out your pockets, examine your phone. They have the absolute right to. The police have the right to control us now. About that. He said he doesn't want to repeal the Public Order Act. He says he wants to let it bed in first. The other thing he didn't mention, which was, excuse me, was HS2. HS2 has been on everybody's lips the last 2 or 3 weeks. And he made a bit of a joke in his speech. He says, honestly, what can you say about a Prime Minister who goes to Manchester to cancel, not HS2, no, didn't cancel HS2, Manchester's train line? Couldn't bring himself to say HS2. There's a video going about on Twitter at the moment, and it shows him talking about HS2, various interviews, and I think they show about 6 different interviews, and in half of them he's saying he's in favour of it, and half of them he's saying he's against it. So he can't talk about that. It's this constant sitting on the fence, constant not committing to anything because you might upset somebody, you might frighten somebody. And this is a serious criticism of them. Now, to go through very, very, very quickly, to go through the rest of the speech and some of the things that caught my eye. He's talking all the time about working people. I mean, 25 times in this 1 hour speech he mentions working people. It's all working people. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you're a director of public prosecutions, are you a working person? If you're a judge, are you a working person? Or is it just people who go to work with a hammer and a chisel and a pickaxe? I mean, are they working people? Who else are you working? What if you're not working? What about all the pensioners? What about the people who are students, children, people who can't work? Are they working, not working people? On and on and on about working people. And then he says, further on, he's... oh, yes. He says, but if we give Britain the certain destination, if we walk step by step with working people, walking step by step with working people, bulldoze through the barriers in their way, lay secure foundations at their feet, mission government our guide, then yes, we can get our future back. Just bonkers. Now, it's not all sort of estate agents waffle. Some of it's very good. He talks about improving the NHS. Terribly important, really, really, really important, and an absolute priority. He then talks about doing away with non-dom tax, which is absolutely brilliant. I mean, it's just essential. I mean, the fact that the people like Sunak's wife can come along and say, "Oh, I'll opt to pay 30,000 or 60,000 a year, whatever it is," and then go away and earn millions and millions and millions on what they're not taxed. Absolutely absurd. There is a slight drawback with doing away with non-doms, and that is a lot of these people who are here as non-doms are likely to leave and take their money with them, but probably it's good riddance. He then goes on about police. He wants more police and police on the streets and so on. Yeah, good again. He wants to put VAT on school fees again. I mean, it seems absolutely obvious and fair thing to do, and it should happen. Again, there is a drawback, and that is a lot of people who can only just afford the school fees are going to say, "Well, we can't afford it anymore. We'll send the children to state school." So that's probably going to it won't be quite as big a gain as it might seem on paper. Then he says a bit further down here, he says, another bit of sort of gobbledygook. Because I believe this country respects itself. The country respects itself. I believe the British people respect each other. He believes that. And I believe that if people see that respect, full stop, see that service in their politics, full stop, then they will commit to the mission of national renewal. You see, if people don't see that the country respects itself, people don't see that people respect each other, then they won't commit to the national renewal. What is this? Who's this for? Then he goes on with all these lists of all the things that he's going to do. He's going to make a Britain built to last, as where working people are respected, crime is prosecuted, amnesties come and go, minimum wage is enforced, infrastructure, So it's just stuff that everybody wants, obviously. Everybody wants obvious things. He then goes on about house building. And again, it's absolutely brilliant. It's the best part of the speech. He wants to get on with house building. He wants to do away with all these unnecessary delays of planning and with builders hoarding land and so on. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Best part of the speech. And then he says, just in passing, this Labour Party will fight the next election on economic growth. And then, almost towards the end, this is about, I've got to printed this out, I reduced it and printed it down to about 13 pages, and on about page 12 he starts talking about the economy. Excuse me. Every new era of growth must start with an expansion of the country's productive capabilities. That is an iron law, if you know what that means on postcard. That's why we hold out the hand of partnership to business. He then says something here which I think he sort of just shows the penny may be beginning to drop. He says, understand that private enterprise is the only way this country pays its way in the world. Now, we all know what needs doing. We know the NHS needs fixing. It needs so much. It needs more staff. It needs more equipment. It needs better hospitals being done. It's all easy to do. Schools are all falling down. They need rebuild. Easy to do. We need a better care service. We need people being paid more money for all these things. Easy. We need better infrastructure. No problem at all. It's very easy. All these things can be solved. All of them can be solved very, very simply. It just needs one thing. It needs lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of money. And it's a question of where the money comes from. Now, governments have three ways of raising money. They can print it, in which case it just goes into the procedure as the banks lend the money and they lend it to people who've got assets. So it just goes into asset inflation. They can borrow it, and we're almost at our overdraft limit. I would have thought we're paying vast amounts on the highest, vast amounts of interest on the highest borrowing almost ever, I think. Or they could tax it. Now, we're already very highly taxed. But tax derives almost always from economic activity. And so the only way you generate the money to pay for all these things you know is by increasing economic activity. It's absolutely vital, basic, fundamental fact. You have to actually create more businesses, make it easier for businesses to succeed. And that should be the government's absolute priority, because it can't do anything else unless it succeeds in this. Their priority should be make it very, very easy as possible to start businesses, to build businesses, to expand businesses. Now, the problem is that, as I say, this comes as a sort of an afterthought at the end of his speech. And they're all the same. Let me just tell you this, which is quite interesting. The Tory government now has 31 ministers. Of those 31 ministers, there's a guy called Alistair Jack. Nobody ever would recognise him, I don't think, not even his wife, I would imagine. But anyway, Alistair Jack, he's been in the cabinet for ages and ages, Scottish secretary. He started a business, I think, hiring out or making tents and marquees and things, and made a fortune, sold it for £20 million. He's very rich, very successful, and he's got a lot of experience in running a business. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, he started a business teaching English in Japan, and then he came back to the UK. He started 3 businesses, they all failed, and then he started a 4th business, apparently, which was running courses for people who were going to go and learn foreign languages abroad. And he got some big contract from something called the British Council, which is some sort of semi-government thing, and made a fortune. He sold the business for 14 million quid. So he's had experience of running a business, and he's made a lot of money out of it. And then there's little grant chaps. He's had all these sort of slightly questionable internet businesses, these self-improvement businesses. And that's it. That is it. That is the extent of the business experience of the whole 31 members of the cabinet. They know nothing about business. They don't understand it. None of them has had any experience of business, apart from those 3. The Secretary of State for Trade and Industry is little, what's her name, Kemi Paternotte, knows nothing about anything. except having to be arrogant and rude to people. No experience in business whatsoever. She worked in a bank. And that's it. Now, as far as the Labour Party is concerned, this is going to be our government next year. Well, looks like it. 31 members again. We've got Rachel Reeves. She worked for the Bank of England, so she's had experience of high finance, but she's not had any experience in business. Excuse me. One, Annalise Dodd, she was an academic, she was a lecturer. One worked for a small business, one worked for a publisher, one was a teacher. 8 of them were lawyers, and 18 of them have never been in politics. The researchers, or they worked for charities or unions. So, no experience whatsoever of business in that cabinet. Jonathan Reynolds, he's the Shadow Secretary of State for Trade and Industry. So he's going to be running, he's going to be doing deals all over the world in high finance, in business, setting all these businesses and running the UK industry and so on. Before he became an MP, he worked for a local council, and then he worked as an assistant to an MP. Now, it's not really the cracked team you want if you're trying to build your economy, when everything you want to do depends upon whether or not you succeed in building your economy. And this is the problem. I mean, I could make a whole video about what they should do, but you've got to create a culture whereby people want to start businesses. And I've said this many times before, I mean, every single big business in the world began as a startup. There's a famous story about Jeff Bezos of Amazon. Amazon must be one of the 2 or 3 biggest businesses, the most successful business ever in the history of the world. He tells about when he started his business. In the early days, he used to put all the parcels for that day's deliveries, that day's orders, in the back of his second-hand car and drive down to the post office, stand in the queue and post them off. And you look at someone like Samsung, for example, make half the mobile phones in the world. The guy who owns or started Samsung started selling vegetables, fruit and veg, in a market in Seoul in Korea. Like the guy who started Zara, he started with a single shop. You have to make it possible for people to start businesses. It's really, really, really important. You have to generate a culture where people want to. I've been going to China for 40 years. And the thing about China, which has been transformed beyond belief in that time, is that all the young people, all they want to do is make money. They want to start businesses, make money. It's too much in my view. I don't like it. It's just also an obsession. But you've got to provide these opportunities. I don't think many people coming out of schools or universities these days think about starting businesses. I think it's easier to go and work for a company. Starting a business is difficult. It's very risky. You're likely to fail. Very, very hard work. But it's fun and it's a challenge and it's exciting, and for a lot of people it suits them. But it's not an option to most people. And I think in this country, it's always been, I think as far as the left are concerned, it really goes into business. They're just out to exploit people. They just want to profiteer and take advantage of other people. But they do have some plans for helping business, small business. And he says, we're going to hold out the hand of partnership to business. And then he goes on about all the time that they're going to scrap 0-hour contracts, and then we're going to fire and rehire and make work pay and all that sort of stuff, which everybody agrees with. And then he says, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with leading CEOs. Now, leading CEOs, that's people like the CEO of Tesco or of, John Lewis or of British Aerospace. These people know nothing about starting businesses. They've never been started businesses in their lives. They'll tell them about huge policy matters. They will tell Starmer how impossible it's been to make any plans with the current government. But that's not helping in deciding how to get businesses going. He says he's going to set up a national wealth fund. He says we'll work hand in glove with the private sector to rebuild the country. Last thing you want is the government working hand in glove with you if you're trying to rebuild the country or rebuild a business. But as we share the risk, we must also share the rewards. You see, we'll give you some money, but we'll take half your business. So we will make sure that the British people retain a stake in our investments. You know, when you start a business, you go along, you borrow some money from the bank. The bank doesn't take a chunky business. Oh, you have to give security and you have to give guarantees and all the rest, but they don't take a chunky business. So if your business does well, you do well. The last thing you want, some civil servants come along and say, oh, we own a share of this business, we think you should do this, we should do that. He says it's not state control, it's not pure free market. Genuine partnership, sleeves rolled up, working for the national interest. Nobody works in business for the national interest. Nobody. Everybody works for their own interests. He says the stand-aside state leaves nobody with the future they want because there's no direction. You see, you need the government directing. These people are clueless and they want to start setting up businesses, taking a share and directing them. It's just a kiss of death. Nobody in their right minds will ever get involved with the government running a business. I started a business a few years ago, and I was showing my goods on a trade fair stand, and a couple of people turned up for they were from the DTI or the DIT or whatever they're called that week. They were youngsters. I mean, I'd had 30 years business experience at that time. These two were, sort of straight out of university. And they said, well, did I want to go and did I want some government advice on exporting and all the rest of it? And I said, well, all right, growing up, and see what they've got to say. Met them a couple of times, and they referred me to their website, and they gave me leaflets and things. They couldn't really teach me anything that I didn't already know. And then they said, did I like someone to have a look at my website and so on? They got somebody to do that. And so this guy, I arranged to meet him, and he had a look at our website, and he said it was fine and so on. And then he said, well, I mind answering some questions. And he got out this file, just dozens and dozens and dozens of questions, customer satisfaction about, were you spoken to politely? Was the advice you were given helpful? And da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I just thought, they're clueless. Civil servants, if you are a civil servant, you're not likely to know much about business, have much idea about business. And I think, as I say, I could make a whole video about this, but I think you've got to sort of set up new structures. You've got to have organisations, maybe groups of businessmen, retired businessmen, or former businessmen, or people who give part-time time to advise and time to look at business plans and so on. It's no good getting the civil servants involved. And that's, as I say, is what's frightening here about how the government seem to want to be involved in any businesses they're going to invest in, and it's frightening. The other story I'll tell you very briefly is that I know somebody very well, started a business a few years ago, and he had a wife and two young children. He was renting his house, and he was really, really keen on this business. He worked every minute that there was. He worked every weekend. He never stopped working. He put all his savings in. His wife was quite happy with it, but he put all his savings in. It was sort of somewhere between £50,000 and £100,000. He borrowed £10,000 to £15,000 from the bank. Started getting letters from something called the Funding Circle, which was some sort of government organisation to lend money to new businesses. And so he thought, well, I'll approach them, and he asked them to lend them £25,000. And they said, oh, you've got a business plan, all the rest of it. And he had to produce a business plan. He had to show how much he was going to be spending on paper clips in 5 years' time and all this sort of thing. Endless scrutiny and so on. In the end, they said, well, you can have your £25,000. Excuse me. It was payable back over 5 years or something. Anyway, he started paying back, and after about 2 years, two and a half years, he found that he just couldn't make it. Despite all this work, all this effort, he couldn't make it. He'd lost everything. He had to get a job, and he went to the bank, and he said, look, I'm sorry, I closed that. And the bank sort of said, well, have you got any assets? And he said, no. And they said, well, okay, right. And as the banks always do, they just they're not going to spend money chasing nothing. They just said, well, we'll write it off at the end of it, close the company. Then he started getting debt collectors' letters from the Funding Circle, the government body, when he was going to pay it back, when he was going to make it pay. Turned out that when he'd signed the agreement, he was personally guaranteeing it. And 6 years later, they are still chasing him for the money. But what's worse still, they registered the debt as an unpaid debt on his credit file. So he only found out about it when he tried to get a mobile phone contract, and they said, "Oh, you've got a bad credit record." So they've not only insisted on pursuing him endlessly, and appear to be continuing to pursue him, but they've wrecked his credit rating for I think 7 years, isn't it? I mean, it's just an attitude, isn't it? It just, how is that helping people, encouraging people to start business? Like he says, I will never ever start a business again, and if you do start a business, I'll never ever borrow money from the government. So, all in all, I don't know whether they do get it or not. I don't know whether the government, whether the opposition, whether Starmer and his lot, whether they do get it that you've got to grow the economy. And they keep talking about growth. It's just so easy to say, we're gonna solve all these problems by growing the economy. Yeah, I can say I'm going to solve all my problems. I'm going to buy all the things I'd like to buy just by getting richer. I'm going to get richer. You've got to have a plan. You've got to have a reasonable, a sensible plan. It's got to be your priority, not something to tackle on the end of your speech. So anyway, as I say, I'm a bit disappointed. Maybe this was just all something to say for the to get more clapping in the hall and to get the votes, because it's been said before, isn't it, as regards Sunak, Starmer's absolute insistence that we will never rejoin the EU single market customs union or have free movement or heaven forbid try to join the EU again. It's said by some that this is just a lie in order to get votes, but maybe this whole speech was a lie to get votes. I don't know. But anyway, that's what I think about it. If you've watched this far, thank you very much indeed. And if you haven't already subscribed, or if you know of somebody you think might be interested, I'd be grateful if you'd either subscribe or pass on my name. And so until next week, thank you for watching and bye for now.